last lecture series for this year, last lecture of the season, and we'll be presenting Daniel Kimmel, QC, who will speak about the Kimmel family, their origins, family tree, and life in Sandy Hill and Lower Town, Ottawa in the 50s and 60s. Ottawa-born Daniel Kimmel attended York Street Public School, Lisgar Collegiate, and the University of Ottawa for both of his degrees. He is married to Marilyn Schaefer and has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. He has practiced law in the City of Ottawa in association with Stephen Victor and Murray Ages for more than 30 years and was appointed a Queen's Counsel in 1982. Mr. Kimmel has been very active in communal and charitable organizations throughout his career, having served as president of Congregation Beth Shalom for 3 years, president of the Ottawa Jewish Community Foundation for 2 years, and general chairman of the UJA in 1987. Mr. Kimmel is the son of Arthur and Sarah Niehanser Kimmel, who emigrated from Russia and Latvia, respectively, in the early part of the last century. They operated a fruit and vegetable store in the Barwood Market for many years. So I welcome Mr. Kimmel.
Thank you, Rosalind. You're welcome. I've never met Rosalind before, but the minute I saw her, I said, you've got to be a Kardish and a Brzezowski, and I was right on both counts. Thank you for your introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out on such a miserable evening. About a year ago, Lawrence asked me to present a lecture to the Historical Society about my family, and in a weak moment I said yes. He then warned me to start the preparation for it immediately. The first thing I did was attend the wonderful presentation by Ethel Taylor about the Greenberg family and the Billingsbridge community, and that's when I began to panic. I had very few pictures and even less history, but I did manage to come up with some family information and material, and I hope you find it interesting. I wish to acknowledge the assistance of my son David and Milton Kimmel's son Brian in preparing this presentation. Our family tree starts with our own Kimmel, whose picture is on the table at the rear of the room, who was born in or about 1840 in the Pale of Settlement, probably Kovel, Russia. He had at least 3 children, one of whom was my grandfather, Yaakov Aryeh, my grandfather's sister, Pesya Kimmel Rovner, and a half-brother, Moishe Kimmel. The sister and half-brother remained in Europe and perished in the Holocaust. Pesya had one son who survived the Holocaust and emigrated to Israel, settling in Tivon after the Second World War. My grandmother, Elke Gaz, had at least one sister, Hinda Lithwick, and one brother, Fischel, whose son Pinchas lived in Ramat Gan. The first time I met him in 1971, I couldn't get over his resemblance to my Uncle Phil, Milton's father, and Barry Lithwick's Uncle Irving. They lived in Rovno, Rostov-on-Don, and finally St. Petersburg, later renamed Leningrad, and now St. Petersburg again. My grandfather came from a religious family, and his first love was learning. He spoke many languages common to the area. As well, he wrote and spoke Hebrew. He was also a bookkeeper by trade and a successful businessman. He and his partner, who was also his brother-in-law, Shama Lithwick, operated a cigarette factory for 28 years until it was confiscated by the Bolsheviks following the revolution. 2 subsequent businesses were also taken from him, and he left the Soviet Union in a depressed state. My father, Arthur, known as Archie and Arkady, was the second of 5 children. He, together with his youngest brother, Philip, known as Pinchas, and Pietra, left the Soviet Union in 1929, crossing west into Danzig, now Gdansk, Poland, and then on to France, arriving in Paris on September 30th, 1929. They left from the port of Le Havre on October 16th, 1929, on a ship known as the De Grasse, and arrived in the port of New York on October 24th with $20 in their pockets. My father's passport and Canadian immigration documents are displayed at the table, on the table at the rear. Can you imagine arriving in New York City on Black Thursday? I'm sure they were so excited about their arrival in the New World that they were oblivious to the financial disastrous events taking place that day. And even if they knew about the crashing stock market, they had escaped from permanent depression to a temporary one. And even though it was tough, they were full of optimism and overjoyed to have left the chaos and intolerance of Europe. They then took the train to Montreal, crossing the border at Rouse's Point on October 25th, and then on to Ottawa. They immediately applied to the Department of Immigration for their parents to follow them. See the letter on the table at the rear from the Department of Immigration and Colonization, dated February 3rd, 1930, approving the application. My grandparents arrived in Canada in 1932, and the family picture at the rear as well was taken shortly thereafter. The three other siblings remained in Leningrad. Ottawa was the chosen destination as the Coopersmith-Lithwick families preceded them, and they had established roots here. One of the immigration documents on the table refers to Benjamin Coopersmith residing at 8 Chapel Street, Ottawa, as their uncle. Mr. Coopersmith's daughter is Bert Klugsberg, who, of course, is with us this evening. My mother's family came from the Riga area of Latvia. Her parents were Tilly and Daniel Hanser. My grandfather left Latvia in 1910, leaving my grandmother and 4 children in search of a better place where his family could live as Jews and prosper. He traveled to South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, and finally Canada. The rest of the family arrived in Canada in 1911, my mother being 6 months old at the time. 4 of the 8 children were born in Ottawa. My grandfather was a shoemaker, and the family established a home and his business on Dalhousie Street at St. Patrick. They managed to prosper, and after several years of struggle, they bought the property at 101 Clarence Street, where my grandmother Tilly remained until her death in 1963. Daniel Hanser predeceased her by some 36 years, dying in 1927 at the age of 52. She ran a second-hand store selling china, furniture, clothing, and other used items that could be resold at a profit. She raised a family of 8 children by herself and even managed to support her brother Hershka. I never knew my grandfather. However, I have very fond memories of my grandmother, who always had a smile on her face and an infectious laugh. My Uncle Jack worked his entire teenage and adult life for the CPR. My Uncle Abe joined the Air Force during World War II and ran the family business following his discharge. He was a member of the Chevra Kadisha for 28 years until his death in 1990. My Uncle Sam joined the Army during World War II and was wounded in action. Returning soldiers were given a huge reception, and I recall the party given for him on his return. Flags draped the entrance to their home, as was the tradition. You knew a soldier was returning from overseas by the flag-draped entrance. I see Joe Leaf in the audience tonight. Joe and his late brother Max were great friends of my Uncle Sam, and I recall very vividly how Joe would help my sister with her algebra. And Joe won't let me forget about the Kachka incident, but that's another story. The premises adjoining 101 Clarence Street was the barber shop run by Nathan Lang for more than 50 years. Mr. Lang was married to my mother's sister, Auntie Annie. The language of communication on both sides of the family was Yiddish, and everyone addressed each other by their Jewish names. I still call my sister by her Jewish name. My paternal grandmother, Elka, was the backbone of the family business known as Kimmel Brothers, a fruit and vegetable business at 1618 Byward Market. I think it had been previously owned and operated by the Rivers family. Am I correct? The site is now Zach's Restaurant, but in between my father and uncle's business, it was the Rubens Paint Shop. My grandmother loved the market but never worked on Shabbos. She died in 1959, and my father, uncle, and grandfather closed the business at that time. One of Canada's leading Jewish philanthropists, a fellow named Raymer, and I've tried to find his first name, but I couldn't, was asked to what he attributed his success in the business world. His answer was Elke Kimmel. It appeared that Mr. Raymer had a fruit and vegetable business in close proximity to Kimmel Brothers, and she literally drove him out of business into something that made him extremely wealthy. My paternal grandfather was the bookkeeper for the business, but his first love was study, learning, and attending services at Marsiki Hadass, then situated at King Edward and Murray Streets. The entire Kimmel family were members of Murray Street Shul, and together with the Nadalny family, occupied the back row at the northeast corner. I recall past presidents of the Shul, Saul Zaslov and Edward Wiener, as well as its long-serving vice president, Harry Pleat. Mr. Pleat was responsible for giving out the aliyahs and other honors, and I recalled the auctioning of the most important aliyahs. $50 for Shlisi may have been the opening bid. It's something you no longer see in Ottawa, although I've seen variations of this fundraiser in Montreal and in Israel. It is my intention to name as many family names as I can recall, seeing that this is being recorded, so that this oral history will keep alive many family names who are no longer in our telephone books. Some of the Marsiki families I recall are Applebaum, Wiener, Zaslov, Appel, Steinberg, Kirchner, Gunner, Pleat, Bordelais, Nadalny, Lithwick, Cantor, Kardish, Bornstein, Weisberg, Zuckerman, Morris, Toller, Eisenberg, Brzozowski, Murray, Gorin, Kogan, Cohn, Ostroff. My grandfather died in 1965, in his 95th year. The market families I recall are Rivers, Steinberg, Greenberg, Weltman, Zunder, Slipikoff, Swetko, Schulman, Zalakovitz, Pleat, Fine, Small, Stone, Coopersmith, Zaslov, Leaf, Hanser, Friedman, Gubler, Lithwick, Lando, Gandel, Zabar, Rudman, Balin, Aaron, Kofsky, Silverman, Wiener, Cohn, Steinman, Gluby, Magidson, Karp, Kevinstein, Slover, Kizel, Kroll, Pedagorsky, Balin, Gossowicz, Zaretsky. Sam Cohn operated a fruit and vegetable stand at the corner of York and Bywood Market. And I always admired his ability to confront anti-Semites and drunks, even with his fists on occasion. He backed down from no one. My father was Arthur, and my mother was Sarah. My sister is Isabel, married to Norman Lesh. Fortunately, they're in Las Vegas tonight. My brother is Arnold, married to Rosalind Magidson, or is with us this evening. My sister-in-law is Ingrid, married to Sam Shapiro. My other sister-in-law is Wendy, married to Michael Green, and they live in Montreal. My daughter is Linda Malamed, married to Warren, who are present here this evening. My Uncle Phil was married to Etty Schulman, and their children are Milton, who's here with his wife Joyce, and Stanley. Our extended family included Annie and Nathan Lang, Nellie and Abe Shapiro, Mo and Jean Hanser of Toronto, Fanny and Jaime Zolov, late of the city of Montreal, the Feingasses of Leningrad and now in Boston, the late Louis and Bashka Gower. Mr. Gower had a tailor shop on Bay Street. I'm sorry to say that we have had little communication with the children of my father's two sisters who remained in Leningrad, although my brother made contact with some of them when he visited Russia several years ago. The family of my father's other brother, Isaac, immigrated to Boston approximately 15 years ago and have prospered there. I had the privilege of knowing Marilyn's four grandparents, Abraham and Mary Schaefer, and Leon and Rachel Fine, who were all able to attend our wedding in 1965. I attended York Street Public School in Talmatora, first on George Street and then on Rideau Street. In 1947, my teacher was Mr. Block, and Lenny Shore picked him out immediately from the picture at the rear. Mr. Block fought with the Jewish Brigade in World War II. The picture at the rear is the commencement of Torah studies of our class. And in the picture are the classmates, as well as our principal, Rabbi Baruch Kravitz, teacher Solomon Shapira, and Mr. Block. After the school year, he returned to Israel to fight for the independence of the State of Israel. His mother was murdered on July 4th, 1976, at the Entebbe hospital during the Israeli rescue of the Jewish hostages, and I caught a glimpse of him on television when he claimed his mother's remains. It was pure coincidence. In 1948, Talmud Torah moved to the Rideau Street campus, and I have two very vivid recollections of that campus that I will never forget and still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. I remember going to Talmud Torah on a warm, sunny Sunday morning in May 1948 when we gathered for a special assembly. Our principal, Rabbi Baruch Kravitz, told us about the rebirth of the State of Israel and the new lyrics for the last two sentences of Hatikvah. No longer did we sing Lo Shuv La'aretz Lavosenu, for the return to the land of our forefathers. We had returned to the land, to Zion and Jerusalem, and we sang the new words to that effect. The other was a sad event. One of my classmates was the class clown, the one who took the lead in mesmerizing our teacher, Mr. Solomon Shapira. It seemed that they battled every class, and it usually culminated in Mr. Shapiro softly kicking him in the rear end with his knee and sending him out the door. One winter day, we told Mr. Shapiro that take a drink. Mervyn Asraf had suffocated when a snow hut he had been building collapsed on top of him. Mr. Shapiro was overcome with grief and sorrow and began to cry. He couldn't continue with the class and dismissed us. Until that moment, I never realized the genuine love he had for his students. And I said to myself, he's doing his best to instill some Yiddishkeit in our stubborn minds, and the least we could do is pay attention and give him a break. From that point on, Mr. Shapiro found us to be a more receptive class. My classmates were the late Phyllis Brill Leaf, Dorothy Zaslav Karp, Walter Viner of Kingston, Elaine Steinman Shapiro, Phyllis Rachman of Montreal, Leonard Shore, who's with us tonight, Daniel Shapiro, Jess Selakovitz, David Shoyet, Stephen Zabar, David Markovich, Paul Hollander, Harold Lewis, John Tavel, Leiby Doctor, Alan Pleat, the late Morty Mayberger, Melvin Schechter. On the table at the rear is a program of the Talmud Torah graduating class of 1954, with pictures of the graduating class bedecked in robe and mortarboard. As a youngster, we attended Sabbath services at Talmud Torah on a regular basis. Every student at Talmud Torah was expected to attend, and we did. The community also organized a successful Sunday morning breakfast club at the King Street Shul, followed by bowling at the Kingpin bowling alleys on Rideau Street. Our supervisor was Abe Hochberg, followed by the late Marvin Schreiber. In both cases, services were led by the students, and I attribute my ability to daven for the Omid to participation in these services. From the time I was able to go out on my own, I was a fan and later a player in the Jewish Men's Softball League, which played all of its games at York Street School. The league continues to this day very successfully and is one of the oldest baseball leagues in the city. Some of the players I recall are Joe Oster, Hy Himes, Boris Blatcher, Mo Sachs, the late Matty Ages, Arnold Ages, the late Herb Zaslav and his twin brother Edward Zaslav, Bob Abelson, Al Abelson, the late Percy Adelman, the late Sid Adelman, Joe Liff, the late Billy Sternberg, Paul Cook, Saul Shabinsky, Louis Sherman, Jack Sherman, Arnie Mayberger, Morris Shacknow, Mel Schechter, Dan Shapiro, Milton Kimmel, Morris Weltman, Jack Wiener, Louis Honigman, Mo Siegel, the late Sam Hansard, Jerry Dover, the late Rocky Eisenberg, Elliot Leviton, Leonard Shore, the late Henry Feller, Stephen Victor, Buddy Pollock, Jerry Pollowin, Archie Cogan, Lenny Cogan. The games attracted large crowds, and I recall Lenny's father, Izzy, followed by Mike Baker, and Milton Greenberg walking the crowd hat in hand, taking collections to pay for the umpires and equipment. My love of sports began at an early age and continues to this day. I am especially proud to be a member of the JCC basketball team that won the City Intermediate Championship in 1962. Some of my teammates were Morris Shacknow, Elliot Leviton, Kenny Ain, Stanley Aaron, Ron Leviton, Richard Leviton, and our coach was the late Irving Shapiro. I recall the beautiful Tel Aviv Tennis Club with its 8 clay courts. It was situated on Riverside Drive at Donald Street, 1/2 mile south of the restricted Rideau Tennis Club. Unfortunately, the game had lost its popularity in the 50s, and the club was later expropriated by the NCC. Some of the tennis greats were the late Sam Hanser, Buck Pozitsky, Harold Lithwick, Mervyn Greenberg, Solly Karlofsky, Joe Kaufman. Our family lived on Nelson Street, a primarily residential street with some commercial enterprises. Sedinsky Brothers had a lumber yard on the street, and Ottawa Ironworks, owned by the Balin family, was also on the street. We were a 5-minute walk to 3 Orthodox synagogues and the JCC, situated on Chapel Street. My grandparents were also in close proximity. Rideau Bakery and Sugarman's occupied the southeast corner of Rideau and Nelson Streets. It then became the site of Nelson Drugs, operated by Cecil Schinder, and the La Paloma restaurant, operated by the Florence family. Rideau Bakery moved to the north side of the street, and Sugarman's moved to the site presently occupied by Rideau Bakery. Halpern's Kosher Butcher Shop was also on Nelson Street, and the Ottawa Kosher Butcher Shop, operated by Misha Zabar and Joe Rudman, was located on Clarence Street in the market area. High holy days were something to behold. The community then consisted of many retailers, and almost all of them closed for the 3 days. In fact, the community would send a printed card to members of the community before the holidays, the card to be placed in the door or window of the store to advise the public that the store would be closed for the high holy days. The market and Rideau Street looked like a typical Sunday when everything was closed. Some of the retailers I remember were Mickenberg, Berlin, Held, Altman, Simkus, Dworkin, Chick and Irving Taylor, Cohn's Pharmacy, operated by Cohn and his son-in-law Izzy Greenberg, Levine, Elfine, Feller, Wise, Schaefer, Kaplan, Goldberg, Friedman, Weinberg, Max, Appel, Dover, Mossian, Dane, Reiter, Lesch, Clavier, Zelikovitz, Edelson, Shapiro, Greenberg, Kaufman, Freeman. Several of those retailers are present tonight. Arthur Max is here, and my father-in-law Milton and his wife Sarah, whose parents were also on Rideau Street, who've also recently celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary. I wasn't as familiar with the merchants on Sparks and Bank Streets, but some names I do recall. Wolf, Snow, Sanders, Siegel, R.N.A. Cohn, Cronick, Ed and Sid Cohn, Macy, Kleiner, Levine, Baker, Rill, Bloomfield, Shaver, Ellis, and just off Bank Street were Oster and Feinstein. The number of Jewish professionals were few. The Jewish accountants were Louis Copeland, Martin Levinson, Herb Nadolny, followed later by Izzy Landau, Morris Ogulnik, Milton Kimmel, and Milton Greenberg. Lawyers were Benjamin Goldfield, whose nephew Morley told me that he was the first Jewish lawyer in Ottawa. J.C. Horowitz, Abe Leaf, Joe Leaf, Moses Doctor, Hy Lepofsky, Ted Metrick, Harry Sigler, Donald Snipper, Sam Berger, Mike Greenberg, Hy Soloway, Morris Wright. All practice as sole practitioners or in association with each other, none with Gentile firms. Dentists were Abe Sloan and Harry Rudman. Public servants in high positions were few. Charles Gavsey was president of the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority, and Louis Rezminski was governor of the Bank of Canada. My remarks are as much a history of Jewish Ottawa in the 40s, 50s, and 60s as they are about my family. Radical changes to our community began to occur in the mid-60s as a result of the separatist movement in Quebec and the opportunities of better positions for Jews in the public service. We have grown from a very small community to almost 15,000 people. Jewish businesses are fewer in number today, but the professions and public service are well represented by our community. We have developed institutions and services that are the envy of communities much larger than our own. My hope is that we continue to grow, to maintain our Jewishness, and to prosper, and this will inevitably result in a stronger Canada and Israel. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.
Are there any questions or comments on the time? Yes, go ahead.
I'm wondering about your experiences as a young man with anti-Semitism.
I had very few. I would avoid going to places that were restricted. I had several instances where, I was called dirty Jew and I was chased and ran away. But when I stopped running and turned around, the people chasing me ran the other way. And I never ran after that. The market was particularly bad. There were many customers of my father who would say, I don't care what our priest says, I like to shop at a Jewish store. That's about it. Yeah.
What areas were restricted?
Well, I mentioned the Rideau Tennis Club, the Royal Ottawa Golf Club. I don't think Jews were very welcome in the village of Rockcliffe Park.
The Rivermead Golf Course.
Yeah.
Ogilvy's.
Ogilvy's, that's right. As we discussed at Lawrence's lecture last month, I think there may have been one Jewish employee at Ogilvy's department store.
He didn't know he was Jewish.
Yeah, right. Yes?
How much research was done through oral conversation, and was there anything written that you found out?
Most of it was written. Well, the oral portions were, of course, discussions with my family, and my parents and aunts and uncles. Does that answer your question?
No, I was more curious about the written element. Were there articles in newspapers?
You mean
Regarding
anti-Semit?
no, I wasn't thinking about anti-Semitism at all. Just in the genealogy that you've now produced, were there articles or advertisements that were printed and written rather than oral?
I don't think so. No.
Are there any other questions, comments?
Danny, a while ago, we were at Monsiki Adas and listened to Adrienne Clarkson. She came to talk to us, and she talked about her life and her family's life in Lower Town area. Did you happen to run into her or her family at that time? And what
Yes, she was the head girl of Lisker when I was in grade 11. So I knew her. I knew her older brother, who is a retired plastic surgeon. He was in grade 13 when I was in grade 9. But she was our head girl in, well, if I can work back, about 1956.
did you know her, know the family? Or?
No, I knew her. I've got my my 5 Lisger yearbooks at home, well preserved, and I can show you pictures
She
of her.
spoke with a lot of affection to the Jewish community.
Absolutely, yeah,
I thought it was wonderful.
yeah.
Her landlord was the Malats.
Yes, I recall reading that in the paper.
Any other questions? I'll ask Stuart Lazier to come forward, please.
Mr. Kimmel, on behalf of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society and all the people gathered here tonight despite the elements, I want to thank you very much for your talk. My head is swimming with all the names and facts you've recited, but at least it's on tape and we can go over it over the next few years. But I hope that either you will come back or Mr. Leaf will come back to talk about the Kachka incident because we're all intrigued by what that is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks to Rosalind and Stuart. Just want to thank Elaine Brodsky for her hard work in the office. That's the end of the 03 speakers series. We have our speakers for next year. The evening's over. Refreshments are at the back. Thanks for coming.